ever felt as though nobody now talks the truth about women? That every interaction is either blind devotion or bitter resentment? Never clarity, never honesty? Women are presented in society as moral leaders, pure and caring. But suppose this picture is only an illusion. What if one of the most divisive intellectuals of the past saw through it all over a century ago? Friedrich Nietzsche dared to express what others would not. Though he did not romanticize women either, he did not despise them. Rather, he asked, what underneath the surface? Not what men desire women to be, but rather who they actually are. Beneath the masks, the ideals, the roles society demands of them, Nietzsche saw something unpleasant, something we still battle today. This is about understanding, not about guilt. It's about revealing the unseen dynamics behind attraction, power, and control between men and women. Stick with me if you are sick of the sugarcoating, the falsehoods, and the delusions. Once you know how Nietzsche saw women, you might never look at love, power, or identity the same way again. Allow me to dissect it here. Men do not, Nietzsche thought, really love women. They like a vision of women, a projection, a well-crafted fantasy that renders them inspired, even superior, safe. He called this romantic idealizing a hazardous falsehood. Women are supposedly naturally pure, innocent, delicate, and ethically superior. For Nietzsche, however, this was self-deception, not appreciation. The perfect woman to him was not a mirror of reality. Men unable of handling the raw, complicated essence of the female spirit created a fantasy. Men reduced women to symbols of virtue, beauty, emotional healing instead of face that complexity. And so they deprived women of their agency. Women turned from actual beings with their own wants, instincts, and strength into characters in men's emotional dramas. For Nietzsche, this was dishonest and cowardly. Men lie to themselves, he said, because they cannot accept the whole truth of what women actually are. Instinctual, strategic, driven by their own type of power. Not better or worse than men, but different. Odd, indeed, but not because women are unreadable. Nietzsche said men just choose not to understand. They'd rather safeguard their dream than confront reality. Nietzsche thought this mask of idealism was not a sign of love. It was a symptom of dread, fear of emotional independence, fear of sexual autonomy, fear of a woman who doesn't need to be saved. Men so tricked even themselves by dressing their dread as admiration, labeled it as love, and pretended. The truth is, though, men sometimes feel betrayed when reality breaks through and the ideal fractures and the true woman shows up. And it's not because she changed. That illusion they produced cannot hold. Always committed to truth above comfort, Nietzsche saw this as one of society's most profound lies. Men must first blind themselves to who women really are before they could love women. Women were never weak to Nietzsche. Conversely, he considered them as masters of a new sort of strength, one that whispers rather than shouts. Men generally show their power in clear terms through domination, position, or aggression, but Nietzsche felt women had evolved a more sophisticated kind of control. Not less potent, only less obvious. To him, this was a sort of evolutionary intelligence. Most of history, women were denied official power. They adjusted since they cannot command armies or rule nations. They learned to influence from the shadows, through charm, seduction, emotional accuracy. Men founded their countries with swords and speeches. Women molded the men who created those kingdoms. Nietzsche observed how women may acquire protection without asking, lead choices without issuing orders, and win allegiance without coercion. Their strength derived from a strong awareness of human nature and was psychological, relational. Men moved for want, ego, pride, and they knew this. And they discovered how to mold those energies without confrontation, not out of hate, but rather out of survival. Although Nietzsche praised this ability, he cautioned against undervaluation of it. Though this type of power is less obvious, it is also more difficult to resist. Nietzsche thought women had a natural sense of strategy, a means of guiding others toward behavior devoid of awareness of their direction. This meant he saw them not as historical victims, but rather as silent strategists within it. This was not flattery. It was a challenge to the innocent presumptions of his day. While society presented women as docile and dependent, Nietzsche saw them as clever, intuitive, and powerfully conscious of their effect. He wasn't assigning them responsibility for this. In the field of human interactions, the most influential individual is usually the one who never has to speak out loud. This is what few others would dare to say. If you're finding this thorough exploration of Nietzsche's viewpoint eye-opening, you will most certainly want to view another video I created called Nietzsche Unveils the Shocking Truth About Women That Everyone Ignored. Before we go ahead, I dissect one of Nietzsche's most misinterpreted theories about women in that video, therefore questioning all we have been taught about gender roles. Watch it straight after this video. It's the ideal follow-up for what we are talking about here. Trust me, it will cause you to reevaluate what you know. Nietzsche thought that appearance drives people more than reality does, and in women he observed this inclination transformed into an artistic medium, not out of superficiality, but rather out of need. In a world when direct authority was denied to them, Nietzsche contended that women learned to exist through illusion, performance, and the careful shaping of perspective. He never charged women of being phony. Actually, he loved their capacity to negotiate a tough environment by honing the surface. Men sometimes mix appearance with reality, but Nietzsche thought women knew the difference naturally. They understand the mask counts more, even though it is not the face. For Nietzsche, women's presentation of themselves is not vanity. Rather, it is their strategy. These are not ornaments. Their beauty, grace, social intelligence are not things. These are tools rather than weapons. Women discover early in a society that devalues their worth to how they are seen that power over perception is control over consequence. While many discounted this as simple femininity, Nietzsche perceived great psychological insight. He thought women naturally understood the symbolic. They know that individuals fall in love with what they desire reality to be, not with reality. Women make the world not only react to it by how they are seen. This is why Nietzsche thought that in human contact, the search for truth is never straightforward. In a world when perspective equals power, the will to appear becomes just as vital, if not more, than the will to be. Women developed this over millennia of exclusion into a skill few understand for what it really is. A quiet, steady mastery of the surface, controlling everything underneath it. Love was not to Nietzsche a harmonic connection. He considered it as a battlefield. Two conflicting impulses battling under the cover of passion. Men and women, he thought, were essentially in conflict rather than naturally in line. Though for such different reasons, they yearned for each other, and that difference fostered conflict, masquerading as connection. Men loved, he thought, from an idealistic perspective, expecting redemption, beauty, and emotional safety. They projected their hopes onto women. Conversely, women loved with more keen instincts. Love for them was more about preservation, about discovering strength, security, and advantage in a world devoid of anything else than about imagination. These were not conscious tactics, Nietzsche said. Driven by biology, culture, and a will to power, they were natural. The dishonesty of it all most troubled him, calling it romance. Society dressed up this battle in poetry and flowers. Beneath that gentleness, though, Nietzsche saw calculation. Under the cover of unity, he observed two forces interacting, influencing one another, trying to control one another. In this sense, love wasn't the end of conflict. It was its most tempting form. Neither did Nietzsche accuse men nor women for this. He criticized the delusion that love was pure, equitable, or free from domination. At its essence, he thought every relationship was a power negotiation, one most people never noticed. They suffered under it, as well as not seeing it. True knowledge for Nietzsche starts when we cease acting as though the conflict is unreal, when we begin to embrace the raw, sometimes violent forces that mold human desire and stop expecting harmony. Love to him was strategy rather than surrender. Like all plans, it also included unseen expenses. According to Nietzsche, Morality was never neutral. It was always a tool created by the weak to defend oneself or by the strong to support dominance. Regarding women, he considered morality as a kind of natural adaptability rather than a strong intellectual dedication. It was about survival, not about truth. Women followed morality for what it let them retain, not for its own purpose, he contended. In a society when men had long dominated with brutal force, Nietzsche said women turned to morality as a protective mechanism. They built a framework whereby their qualities were appreciated not because they were universally excellent, but rather because they were strategically effective by raising virtues like humility, patience, and self-sacrifice. Morality turned into a means of influence in a society that would not grant them direct power. Nietzsche found genius rather than dishonesty in this, a stealthy subversion of the power hierarchy, employing virtue as the rhetoric. Women, he believed, had perfected the capacity to moralize weakness, that is, to make what was previously a constraint seem as a higher form of life, and society approved this without inquiry, keen to preserve the idea of order. Nietzsche's perspective, though, was not romantic. Beneath this surface of morality, he thought, was a deeper urge for control and preservation. He heard computation when ladies mentioned fairness. When they mentioned morality, he understood strategy, not out of hate, but rather out of need. To Nietzsche, the moral stance was always performance, never innocent. And in women molded for millennia by dependency, it evolved into a means of negotiating a difficult environment without ever seeming to fight, not with weapons, but with ideals, feeling, and silence. A silent morality that disarmed without ever exposing the blade. Women were expected in Nietzsche's day to be docile, obedient, and limited to household tasks. Still, he sensed the storm building even then. Women starting to question, push, and go beyond the roles history had prescribed for them caught his early signals of a change, and he was not surprised either. He felt agitated. Women's strength, he thought, has always been underappreciated, not because it was invisible, but rather because it was hidden. Their power was subdued, indirect, gentle in centuries past. When such power no longer conceals, though, what results? When women quit looking to men for identity, safety, or approval. The emergence of the autonomous woman worried Nietzsche about the whole basis of society being rocked, not because he felt women were inadequate, but rather because he felt most men weren't ready. Raised to feel better than others by default, the normal male would be quite vulnerable if a woman stopped depending on his strength, income, or affirmation, and that threat would show up as resentment, not as respect. This has nothing to do with sexism. It was foresight. A woman released from dependency becomes a force of nature, Nietzsche knew. She moves directly, aggressively, and unreservedly self-defined, transcending emotional manipulation or moral superiority. And such kind of woman, Nietzsche said, would scare a society based on consoling delusions. He did not pen this as either celebration or criticism. He wrote it as a warning that disturbance will define the future rather than harmony. The ascent of the autonomous woman would not bring peace. It would set off strife, uncertainty, and a terrible redefining of identity for both sexes. Because the old world loses authority when women cease seeking permission. And for Nietzsche, that was unquestionably permanent and unavoidable. Nietzsche did not write to disparage women. He wrote to cut away illusion, since to him, truth was holy, even if it was cruel. Many misinterpret. But his worldview was not based on anger. It started with clarity. And in that clarity, he noticed a possibility outside the never-ending games of control, reliance, and denial. He saw the possibility for something better. Most interactions between men and women, Nietzsche thought, were based on mutual illusion. Every side tried to win a game without realizing they were playing one. They disguised flaws and projected dreams. What then occurs when both sides remove their masks? When women stop manipulating and men no longer idealize, when neither uses charm or dominance to gain control, but instead stands totally aware of who and what they are? This Nietzsche said was rare, but not unqualified. It demanded the death of sentimentality, the rejection of inherited roles, and the bravery to confront each other not as saviors or enemies, but as equal in power, equal in darkness, and equal in potential. Not the same, yet equally defective, equally able of transcendence. One has to give up bitterness to get to this place. The man has to shed his resentment toward the woman he no longer needs. The woman has to release her resentment toward the man who once imprisoned her. Only then will something deeper show up, a redefining of what it means to connect, rather than a reconciliation of the sexes. Nietzsche promised nothing that this would be simple. Most would never be reached by him. For those who could, that is, those ready to give comfort for truth, illusion for reality, a different kind of connection might develop, one derived from common strength rather than delusion or anxiety. Not domination, but mutual becoming. Nietzsche's observations of women were warnings, predictions, and opportunities, not just notes. He pushed us to see past appearances, face difficult realities, and welcome the unvarnished dynamics of personal connections. Though harsh and even divisive, his ideas compel us to consider, are we ready to face the truth about each other and ourselves? The more you investigate Nietzsche's standpoint, the more you realize how important it remains today. Men struggle to balance their established duties with a fast-changing social scene, while women negotiate a world molded by out-of-date ideas and expectations. Perhaps more sharply than ever, the conflict Nietzsche noted between appearance and reality, power and perception, is still present. Understanding Nietzsche's points of view helps us to clearly examine these dynamics. We observe how historical events have molded gender relations, how society's illusions endure, and how both men and women could transcend them. It's about observing the forces at work and choosing our response, not about guilt or glory. Ultimately, Nietzsche's theory challenges us to do one thing above all: pursue truth, even if it is awkward. We cannot transcend reality except by confronting it. If you discovered this analysis of Nietzsche's opinions on women thought-provoking, hit the like button. It truly helps the channel flourish. And remember to subscribe for more videos like this one if you enjoy delving into difficult, provocative realities about life, love, and power. I now want to hear from you. Do you believe Nietzsche missed the mark or agree with his view of women? Tell me in the spaces provided below. Linked right here or in the description, my other video, Nietzsche unveils the shocking truth about women that everyone ignored, will pique your interest to delve even more. I appreciate your viewing. Next one will see you.